Hi, everybody. This is Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. It is July 5th today, Friday, and I'm sitting down to make a little video to discuss our upcoming Mercury retrograde. So this is, in terms of the major transits of July, this is right up there with the eclipses in terms of the most significant and impactful celestial events happening. Mercury retrogrades are common. Of course, they generate some of the most, widespread social media, internet postings because, well, actually, you'll see that people from all walks of life, even if they don't believe in astrology at all, are really keen on Mercury retrogrades. I remember, for example, talking to a web designer, someone that I was working with who was helping me with some uh, web related stuff. And they were like, well, we're not going to run into Mercury retrograde, are we? And they didn't know that I was an astrologer for a living. It was my wife and I own a yoga studio. And so, I just found it, I was shocked. I was like, wow, this person, uh, you know, I said, are you into astrology? And they said, no, no, I just know that Mercury retrogrades are not good for, so I'm always, so this person who worked in the web was constantly aware of Mercury retrogrades. Anyway, I've noticed that Mercury retrogrades are one of the most widespread, seemingly accepted astrological phenomenon. So it's a big deal just because Mercury's retrograde, but it goes retrograde like three, sometimes even four times a year. You'll get the retrograde of Mercury, and the that I think Mercury, including its shadow periods, is in one of its either shadow or retrograde phase for like a third of the year. And Mercury is sort of the quintessential planet of retrogrades in that sense, because Mercury is always retrograding back and forth, in terms of it appearing as the evening star, retrograding, sort of dying under the beams of the sun, emerging as the morning star, eventually turning direct, disappearing beneath the beams again, rising as the evening star, and then retrograding and doing the whole thing over. That's just happening round and round. So you get that full cycle happening like 3 to even 4 times a year. Mercury, in this sense, Mercury retrogrades have to be ranked according to different levels of phenomenon that make a Mercury retrograde stand out more or less. So not all Mercury retrogrades are built the same, and they're not going to affect each of us individually on the same level either. So here are some things that make this particular retrograde stand out, and also that you could use some of these criteria to judge whether or not any given Mercury retrograde is going to be a big deal for you personally. So one of the first things that you can think about is that when Mercury stations, it slows down, it stops, and it's about to turn retrograde, the degree upon which it sits in the zodiac. And you have to remember that individual degrees of the zodiac were each called Moira, or basically portions of fate. So each degree of the zodiac is thought of as a kind of portion of fate. And there are actually many planets that are associated with the individual degrees of the zodiac. For example, every sign of 30 degrees is broken into 5 subsections, which are ruled by a planet, and these are called the bounds of each sign. You also have 10-degree increments from 0 to 10, 10 to 20, and 20 to 30 that are each ruled by a planet, and that's called the planet's face. Or a sign's face, different faces within the sign. And you also have triplicity rulers of the signs, and so on and so forth. And you also have what are called the dodecatemories, which are basically 2.5-degree increments, right? The 2.5-degree increments is related to the moon, which takes about 2.5 days to go through a sign. So there's all of these different numerological ways of breaking up the signs into different portions. When Mercury stations at a very powerful degree, and usually the thing that defines that degree is going to be its aspectual connections, its lines of sight to other planets in the sky, then the Mercury retrograde becomes much more powerful. For example, for this retrograde, Mercury is making that station and turning retrograde as Mars is coming up behind it in direct motion. And so there's basically a conjunction with Mars happening at the moment that Mercury is turning retrograde. And that makes the retrograde much more powerful because, or for example, right now Mercury's in about 2 degrees off from a square to Uranus in Taurus. That's another thing that makes the Mercury retrograde powerful. It's a bit also like new moons, right? If a new moon is conjoined with Neptune, or if a new moon is conjoined with Mars, or whatever the case might be, the new moon cycle is going to be toned by a blending of planetary energies. Usually that makes the retrograde, or the moon cycle, a lot stronger, or more pronounced in some way, more dynamic. And so right now, this Mercury retrograde hitting the conjunction to Mars is significant for this reason. And in general, planetary aspects at the time that the retrograde planet, at the time that it's stationing to turn retrograde, very powerful. And I'll explain a little bit more about the technicalities of why that is, but that's the first thing to look for when you're just assessing retrogrades. Another thing to look for is this retrograde stationing on a planet in your birth chart? So you might have to know a little bit more of the technical details of your birth chart to apply this technique. But basically, like, let's say this Mercury retrograde is happening at about 4 Leo. Do you have any planets at 4 Leo? You know what I mean? Do you have any, is it going to be square to any planets or opposed to any planets in your chart at 4 Scorpio, or 4, 4 Taurus or 4 Aquarius, right? Look at those things. And trines and sextiles you could count as well, but I'd really look at the conjunctions, squares, and oppositions first. You also want to look and see, is this retrograde happening in an angular house, meaning the 1st, 4th, 7th, or 10th whole sign house? Now, if you don't know what a whole sign house is, whole sign houses are basically a way of calculating the birth chart by looking at the first sign that's rising and making that the entire first house, and then in zodiacal order going around, and the next sign is the second house, the next sign is the third house, right? Like that. That's how monthly horoscopes are written, in that format, and that's the way that ancient astrologers practiced, and that's the way Indian astrologers still practice as well. So at any rate, if a Mercury retrograde is landing in your 1st, 4th, 7th, or 10th house, also more dramatic, more dynamic. So those things are all going to matter as well. The quality of the sign that Mercury is in, when it's in a cardinal sign versus a fixed sign versus a mutable sign. So if it's in a masculine sign versus a feminine sign, cardinal signs initiate things, and oftentimes there's a very rapid, punctuated, dramatic kind of turning point. It has the feeling of turning or shifting very dramatically and sort of suddenly. Whereas fixed energy, and this Mercury retrograde is in a fixed sign, is going to be about working with deeper patterns, deeper structures of the psyche, of psychology, of life, and sometimes it's going to be slower to develop, deeper, slower moving. And then, masculine or feminine, right? If you have, and I won't go through everything right now, but just if you have masculine, like this particular Mercury retrogrades in Leo, which is a masculine sign, masculine signs are more dynamic. So they develop it gives it a little speed. Whereas feminine signs, usually, again, it's a little bit more organic and gestational, takes a little while. Those are just subtle qualities that can also help you understand what kind of retrograde we're dealing with. So a retrograde in a fixed sign, in a masculine sign, and then conjoining with Mars and loosely square to Uranus, that's the basic conditions that make this particular retrograde so impactful. Now, for example, I'll just use an example from my own chart. In my chart, Mercury is retrograding in the 4th house, which is an angular house. That's the house of home, family, property, roots, parents, etc. So I'm at my mother's house right now in Michigan, where my family's having a little family vacation time. Back home, we have someone house sitting for us, and there are workers there who are redoing our bathroom, right? So I looked at this and I thought, okay, well, it would not be surprising if there was a delay or some kind of snafu, you know what I mean? Just purely based on the fact that this is going to be more dynamic and it's taking place in the home and property. in my own chart, right? So you can gauge it like that too, and just prepare yourself a little bit. Now, I'm not superstitious about Mercury retrograde. Sometimes I think maybe I should be, because I've had a lot of, some really challenging Mercury retrograde stories before, as probably some of you have. But what I've learned over time is that Mercury you can't trick a trickster, So you can't con a con artist. So trying to like work around Mercury, I have found to be less effective than just rolling with it, not making really impulsive decisions. But for example, I had planned this remodeling a long time ago. And so when I recognized, because I believe it or not, even though I'm an astrologer and I do this 24/7, I don't obsess over my own chart at all. Like I look at my own chart very rarely, actually. Maybe once a month I'll flip it open, just see what's going on. And I know where everything, is heading in the big picture, but I don't look at it that often. So when I notice that something's coming up with Mercury, I say, oh, I've got this home repair scheduled and Mercury's going to be retrograde. I don't freak out about it. I'm just like, okay, well, that should be interesting. And unless there's something that I'm doing that seems grossly negligent, impulsive, risky, etc., I'll just let the cards play out and just, I found that it's very helpful with Mercury to just kind of, basically just humble ourselves before the planetary forces and just say, if there's something I'm here to learn, if there's some karma that's going to come up, I'm willing, I'm game, because whatever you have to show me, something as powerful and beautiful as a planet is going to talk to me about something cool, unless I'm doing something that's really stupid and I know it, you know what I mean? I'm just going to let things play out and see how it goes. That's my general mood, I guess, with all the planets. But anyways, that's my advice for dealing with Mercury retrogrades. So you see the retrograde hitting angles in your chart. You see it making aspects to planets in your chart or planets in the sky. Those are the ones that are going to stand out a little bit more. Let's take a look at this one. I'm going to put it up on the screen and just show you the actual dynamics. So here you'll see that Mercury is preparing to turn retrograde, and it's doing so pretty close to Mars. Now, I'll walk this forward and show you the way this is actually going to play out. So you can see in my software anyway, which I use SolarFire. Highly recommend it if you have a little bit of extra money to drop and you really like using you could use an astrology software program. You'll notice that underneath Mercury, there's a little S that pops up. That means Mercury's stationing, starting to slow down and stop. Then Mercury's going to go backward, and that is, let's see, so then it'll turn red, which means it's like really, it's stationing is slowing down, and then the red means it's stopped, and then go forward the next day, July 9th. So between the 8th and the 9th, it's turning retrograde, and Mars getting into that conjunction with Mars. And then we see again right away, pretty significant that it's only 2 degrees from a square to Uranus. Okay, so that's just to show you visually, what we're talking about here. So it's that energy with Mars that we want to talk about today and get a handle on. So basically, there's a few layers we need to talk about, and I want to, as usual, give you. My wife says, my wife always reminds me, give these 2 things. What should you do and what should you not do? So we'll make sure we include what should you do and what shouldn't you do. But let me talk a little bit about Leo. Let's talk a little bit about Mars, and let's talk a little bit about Uranus. So I'll preface this by saying that a lot of the times people will say, why do astrologers pay attention to a planetary phenomenon like a retrograde? And it's actually an optical illusion, right? So why do we think that it means anything or does anything? This comes from this question. It's a smart question, but it comes from a way of thinking about astrology that's really fundamentally flawed or incorrect. When we think about astrology as a causal science, like, oh, Mercury's turning backward in the sky right now, and that's going to cause something to happen. Like, again, like if I roll a bowling ball towards the pins, the bowling ball is going to knock the pins over in a causal manner. one thing hits and does something to the other. So sometimes people think that astrologers believe that the planets are literally doing something to create events. This is not the best way to understand what's happening, and this is not the way that even ancient astrologers understood what was happening. As the history of astrology progresses, the tradition progresses, it becomes more interesting for astrologers to start imagining that there is some kind of causal celestial science. Astronomy is advancing, science and math are advancing, like this. And so we're starting to think, hey, how are the planets actually causing all the events on Earth to happen? That's an early form of thinking. But prior to that line of thinking starting to enter astrology, the planets were seen as omens, signs, or indicators of the will of the gods. And so this language, this picture of a birth chart, and things like retrogrades are really indicators, signs, or omens. So sometimes I tell people that one of the simplest ways of envisioning what's going on is, rather than saying, oh yeah, Mercury retrograde is causing your car to break down or a technology meltdown or something like that, rather to think about it as Mercury retrograde is a sign, an omen, or an indicator that something may happen in a certain way. Like you might have problems with technology or delays while traveling or something like that. Typical Mercury retrograde stuff. Another way of thinking about it is like you can think of the sky as like an elaborate, constantly rotating spread of tarot cards. When you flip a tarot card over, and some of you have heard me say this probably already a million times, but when you flip a tarot card over, let's say you get the sun card, shows a little like child on a horse and the sun is up above in the tarot card. Often a sign of fertility, of joy, of happiness. Well, if you flip over that card and you say, how's today going to be? And you flip over that card, it's not like, oh yeah, well, the sun card is going to cause me to have a joyous day today, or is going to cause my wife to get pregnant or whatever. And I need to knock on some wood there. No more babies. So anyway, so yeah, like we don't sit there and think to ourselves, oh, the tarot card is causing this to happen. If you flip the death card and somebody dies, not like the death card, like the death card caused that death to occur. Nobody questions that when it comes to tarot, because everybody knows quite clearly this is symbolic. These are omens, these are signs, these are indicators. And it's very mysterious the way in which omens, signs, or indicators can point to different forces in the universe playing out in a certain way to create certain kinds of outcomes or events. Similarly, if you're walking in the woods and a mouse runs across the trail in front of you, you may know something about the symbolism of mice, some mouse energy, some mouse medicine or something like that, right? And you're like, but the mouse isn't going to cause something to happen. The mouse is symbolic appearance that speaks, right? So the planets in the configurations that we study, including retrogrades, are trying to speak to something. They're trying to indicate or point towards something, but they're doing so symbolically. Does that mean that the planets don't have energies or forces? Well, no, of course they do. Everything in creation has life force and energy, and it's all interacting. But the point is that ancient astrologers really saw the planets as the signs of the cosmic. They were indicators of the cosmic mind, of the thoughts of the cosmic mind, of the thoughts of the universe, which would bear some resemblance to events in the way they played out on planet Earth, so to speak. But you could also think of the planets, generally speaking, as indicators or omens of the gods. So when we say that a planet is turning retrograde, any planet that's turning retrograde, all we're saying is that from our perspective, from our divinatory symbolic perspective, we are omen watchers. And we have a language that we use in a sort of system that we use. And in that sense, it's sort of a science. But it's not a science in the other sense, where it's the planets are causing everything. We know very well that Mercury is not literally moving backwards in the sky. But what does it mean from when in our perspective, a planet suddenly seems, moving forward through the zodiac, to be going backward and it slows down and it stops, and then it turns, and then it moves backward. Well, the traditional meaning is a turn of fate, a twist of fate. It's that simple. It's a twist of fate. It's a turnaround. You can also see it as delays because the planet's slowing down and stopping. So the forward movement of some archetypal energy or field, or some, in some symbolic manner, something is stopping. That's why there's delays. That's why there's unexpected obstacles or blockages, because the omen is speaking to something in your life, and then it's instead of continually moving, it's suddenly stopping. This can also mean, when something's retrograding, that when a planet slows down and stops, that it gains significance. It's not just, oh, well, there's going to be an obstacle, there's going to be a delay, there's going to be a breakdown. Yeah, those things are possible. But another possible meaning is that, like, okay, let's just imagine you and I are walking down the street, right? And we're talking and, we're hanging out, whatever, shooting the breeze. And all of a sudden I just stop. I just stop on a dime, and I just get really big, really big in the eyes. You're just like, okay, this is like he's going Children of the Corn on me. He's gonna go completely bonkers in a second. So similarly, when a planet, which is an indicator of a god, suddenly slows down and it just stops, and then it's you can think of it, it's like it stops, and then all of a sudden it's like it starts emanating this really intense sound, like the planet becomes a singing bowl. Have you ever seen one of those? You kind of use the mallet, and you kind of go around, and then it emits this really, and it gets louder and louder. So it's like a planet that's slowing down to stop is also like that. It's like really getting your attention, or turning around, a reversal. Something that's been gained will be given back, because you're going forward through the zodiac, and then you're going backward. I like to say it's like Pac-Man gobbling up Moiras, little portions of fate, little degrees of the zodiac, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm going to go backwards. Blah, blah, blah. This is spitting. I'm spitting up everything that I've taken in. So you think of Pac-Man barfing is the spiritual message of the day today. So at any rate, you're thinking about the planet giving up something that's been gained. So turns of fate, turns of fortune, giving up something that's been gained, something suddenly stopping and taking on great significance and gravity. You're also thinking about delays. And sometimes obstacles. But whatever the case might be, you want to look in your birth chart at the whole sign house, because those are the topics that will be activated, right? So Mercury can refer to a lot of different things, and it doesn't really have to refer to anything super specific either. You can just look at the house and be like, a turn of fortune, a reversal, a blockage, a delay in, the house of siblings, or short journeys, or money, or health, or whatever like that. So knowing that, we become a little bit more prepared. And with that preparation, obviously, you can help yourself with the number one most important thing, which is not to flip out and make really reactive decisions. When Hermes throws you a curveball, that's like basic, the most basic thing you want to avoid. Okay. Now that my digression about retrogrades and the symbolism of retrogrades is complete, let's talk about Mars. So when Mercury, first of all, Mercury's in a fire sign, right? And so this is a fiery Mercury, and it's in the sign of the sun. You could really get into that space of our ego. Leo too, right? Our sense of what makes us special, what makes us unique. And when you get Mars involved, then you have the potential for there to be breakdowns in communication, or blockage, or obstacles, or reversals, or turns or twists of fate that come up specifically because of conflict, Mars, that generates around, misunderstandings, Mercury, and communication breakdowns, Mercury, that relate to the ego in some way. Our pride, our sense of being special, of being strong. So it's an especially important time to think about, in your relationships, if you're feeling like my pride, my ego, my sense of importance is being challenged or thwarted, and I want to make a big show of it, or I'm really feeling tempted to lash out or to say something, or, if you've ever seen, the movie Jerry Maguire. This is kind of a throwback, but I was remembering this. My wife and I were talking about like old movies, right? And um, Jerry Maguire is an old one, right? So in the movie, there's a scene where he's basically getting fired, and as he's leaving the office, his pride's injured. Just Tom Cruise plays Jerry Maguire, and as he's leaving the office, he basically makes this big stand, like this big pronounced like sermon, and he's like, "Who's coming with me? Who's coming with me?" And everyone's like, "Bye," So that's like a perfect image in some ways for this Mercury retrograde, right? It's kind of like you could easily, your pride could be a little injured. There could be something that happens that makes you feel like you're not appreciated or not respected. And then there's this Shakespearean, there's this urge to make some kind of Shakespearean statement about it. So be very careful of that, because you probably regret it. I mean, that's, if you react with some big show of ego because your pride feels injured, I think right now, mostly we're going to regret that kind of thing. The other thing to be careful of is just bullying, domineering speech, words, etc. Just feeling too high on ourselves, like bragging, or feeling high and mighty, bossy, bullying, etc. So be careful of that right now as well. Why? Because when Mercury slows down, right, and it gains such, it's like gaining prominence and strength, and it's Mercury in Leo, and then Mars comes into it. It's like, don't become an a-hole, basically, right? Just be nice to people and be nice to yourself too. The potential to feel the urge to do or be something really heroic right now, and you don't necessarily need to. So be careful of that as well. The other thing that can happen is when it comes to debates, argumentation, or challenges with or to authority. So be careful of getting into it with your boss. Be careful, because even though authority figures in your life right now may come across as irrational, they may be on a power trip, they may be egotistical, be careful of getting into it with people in power or challenging power structures right now. I only say that not to say just lay down and take it if something really bad is happening, but more just, there's just a feeling right now of like the potential for someone to kind of wield power in a crappy way and to be hurt by it. So sometimes one of the things that I've learned, especially in about 10 years of my life where I drank a lot of ayahuasca. That was a big part of my spiritual path, and I wrote a book about it as well. During that 10-year span in ayahuasca ceremonies, there'd be times where you're just getting your butt kicked. And actually, the bravest thing that you could possibly do is submit. One of my friends who practices mixed martial arts, that's kind of his workout jam, he said that one of the best things that ever happened to him in his life while studying mixed martial arts, he doesn't fight people for real, he just practices at the gym and learns about, it's basically self-defense. I think it's jujitsu, or I don't remember, but he said that one of the best things that ever happened to him was, getting into these sparring situations in the gym and getting to the point where he had to submit, tap the person and say, I can't do anymore, or whatever. It's kind of wrestling martial arts. They get you into holds sometimes where it's like, I can't do anymore. So the universe gets us into positions like that too. And I remember during many ayahuasca ceremonies basically realizing the bravest, most courageous thing I could do, the thing that also solidifies within my heart that I'm strong, that I'm worthy, that I'm a beautiful person, is to be big enough to say, that's too much for me. I submit, I surrender. Similarly, when you're sometimes there's times in life where, people are being unfair to us, or people are being crappy. And it's tempting, especially when this is especially true, right? When you could really kick their butt. Maybe you have more power than they do at work, or maybe you're smarter than they are. You could give them a real tongue lashing or something. But sometimes it's just best to let that pass and really just be the bigger person in a silent way. You know, people say all sorts of really presumptuous, arrogant things, and people feel really entitled to act like they have a lot of authority on subjects that they don't. You know, but sometimes far better for us, stress wise and health wise and everything, is to just let it go. You know, to just be like, hey, you know, I'm just gonna be the bigger person here and just not get tangled up in that. But there's a fine line between that and avoiding conflicts because we're afraid of conflicts. So this Mercury and Mars moment can also be about the need to stand up for ourselves or to express our, you know, to say, hey, I have worth as a person, and you can't walk all over me here. You can't take advantage of me. So, excuse me. So, maybe some of the best advice for this is also to pick your battles carefully. I think that's maybe the way of boiling it down here. All right, so let's talk about the square to Uranus. The square to Uranus emphasizes the rebel, the defiant one, right? It emphasizes the need to be rebellious or defiant, or to speak truth to those in power, or to rebel, or to be original and to be innovative. It's a great moment to be, you know, sort of bold, inventive, and to take a risk, especially doing something, you know, maybe innovating something with technology, Mercury, or something that's creative and artistic that you want, a way of self-expression, which is very Leonic. So daring and boldness and innovation is to some extent favorable right now. But again, it really, to me, it's really about, well, where is this coming from in the ego? And, you know, is the ego really just trying to get high on itself right now? You know, are we just trying to do something to, you know, make a statement, make some, you know, like that? Or are we, you know, are we doing something that's personal, that's individual, and it might constitute a risk, but it's really about our heart. So know the difference between trying to make a statement and doing something original from the level of the heart, or from the level of the head, or your social concerns, you know, your basically your ego. Now, the other thing that can happen, and we have to talk about this even though it's brutal. Look, you know, Mars, Mercury, and Uranus together can be like accidents, especially with transit, cars, travel. Be really careful about, you know, road rage, people who you know, driving really aggressively and crazy. Just be very careful about that on the roads. That's the Cancer in me just worrying, right? But just be careful, because this does have the feeling of like accident or disaster on it a little bit. For example, this is quintessential Mars Uranus with Mercury retrograde all in the mix. Yesterday there was, like, I think it was a 6.6 magnitude earthquake in Southern California. That's that Mars Uranus, where you get things that are very destabilizing, sudden, potentially violent, yeah. So, and it's dramatic right now because you got Mercury, Mars, and Uranus. The potential for there to be fires, explosions, accidents, injuries, you know, sudden, unexpected, ground shaking, or yeah, what do we want to say? Like destabilizing energy is very present right now. So be careful of that, and recognize that it can sneak up on you too, especially in your relationships. It's not just environmental. I mean, very, very few of us are going to have any kind of accident or injury or something like that. But it is possible, especially for our egos, to be triggered into creating a little natural disaster in our immediate environment. So that's what I'm you know, most concerned about for this one. All right, so that pretty much sums up the major points that I wanted to make. I will leave us with one spiritual idea, and this goes into some of what we've already been talking about. In this day and age, I can't tell you how many people over the course of, let's say, 10 years of doing this professionally now, have approached me and said, you know, what's your marketing strategy, or how did you get clients, or like, how did you become, because people ask because it's not exactly easy to become a full-time astrologer. Just as it's not easy to become a full-time acupuncturist or a full-time yoga teacher. It's one of those careers where it's not like someone's out there, there's like a big company that will hire you if you're an astrologer. You have to do it on your own. And people always ask me that question. I mean, not always, but it comes up regularly enough that I've had a lot of time to consider it at a deeper level, because sometimes you just answer things like that flippantly. You say, well, like this or that, but the more I think about it, the more that what I've come to recognize is that I've actually put very little into some kind of ambitious attempt to do anything with astrology, to be anything, or to earn any kind of money, or to, right? It's been my love of astrology itself. That's what I tell people now. It's like, just when people say, how do you become a successful astrologer? And I'm going to make a larger point in a second here, but it's just an example. I say now, rather than saying, well, I tried this kind of thing, or I did that, or I just say, I've just loved astrology. It's been so dear to me. And my love for this, and my relentlessness in trying to make sure that I can do this full time, because that's what I want to do, and my just relentlessness with it, I think has been my success. Okay, now at the same time, the Indian scriptures, the yogic scriptures, teach that even when you do have success, it's not really yours. Just like the land that we own isn't really ours, right? If you own a little piece of property, it's not really your property. It's just the earth, right? So similarly, when we have any degree of success in life, it's not really ours either. I'm saying this because one of the things that comes up with this particular transit, Mercury, Mars in Leo, square to Uranus, is like, how can I scheme and plot to get famous, or to become successful, or to come up with a marketing campaign, or to express myself and be seen, to actualize my power? All these new age quips about that are really about strategies for getting noticed, or trying to get people to like me or recognize me in some way. That's the right. So when we right now, be careful of all of the strategizing or trying to innovate ways of becoming more noticed or more popular. It's a much better time to innovate and find new ideas that are rooted in your love for something. So if you're sitting there thinking, I'm really struggling with X, Y, or Z, and I'd like it to be more successful, I'd like it to have more recognition, whatever the case might be, see if you can just make a little shift in your mind to thinking, how can I love what I love more deeply, more intensely? And how can I innovate and think of new ways from a space of joy and happiness with what I love, of doing what I love? And then if it's successful, great. And if it's not, then I'll have been happy by doing something fun and interesting, and I'll have been feeding what I love. And when I feed what I love, I'm fed, right? There's a reciprocal exchange that happens when we feed what we love. So I'm saying that because, again, I think that there's a potential right now for there to be a lot of scheming about what makes me great, or what's my legacy going to be, or what will I, like, for example, in the sports world right now, Kawhi Leonard, big basketball star, is making a decision about what team he wants to play for, and the entire media, right, around the sports world is speculating about what will make him great, what's going to make him awesome, what's going to win him championships, where will he get the MVPs, where will he make the most money, blah 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 blah. All speculation about this big decision that he's going to make, right? At the end of the day, I really liked what one commentator said, which is the only thing that actually matters in this is that he follows his heart. All of the rest of us speculating about this are just speculating. The only thing that really matters, the advice that someone should be giving him, is just do what's in your heart. When you take a risk from the standpoint of your heart, you win just because you did it. You know what I mean? And that's what I've learned about astrology over time, is like, I just love astrology. So I'm just going to do the hell out of astrology, and just see what happens, and I'll be happy with that. Now, I'm not saying that, we're human. It's natural to be disappointed if you're not being recognized in the world for the things that you love. That's hard. It's just difficult. But right now, I think the energy is just double down on what you love and be original and creative through the heart. Don't try to scheme and wheel and deal trying to get something, because in the end, it'll probably complicate your life more than anything. When we also ask, how can I serve? How can my love for something that's pure and good and true be of service to others? And when we take a risk from the standpoint of, how can I be of greater service? How can I love what I love in newer and more interesting ways? How can I occupy myself with more of what I love? And how can what I love be of service to others so I radiate it into the world? These are the really good questions for a Leo transit of any kind. So I hope that this has been helpful for you. And, because we got to have a little cosmic church in our life. There's a lot of things happening in the world. And for many of us, astrology and the forecasts are, it's a way of communing with divinity, just to hear and talk about this kind of stuff, regardless of what happens. So I hope that the music of the spheres is with you today, and that you would have a very blessed and sweet Mercury retrograde. I hope you'll share your stories on the feed, and we'll be back to play with a few more transits. The Sun is moving into an opposition with Saturn. That should be fun. Like having looking at that, and then Venus going through oppositions to Saturn and Pluto is something we'll do in the days ahead. So stay tuned for more. Okay, take care, everyone. Bye.